Good evening. The story you are about to hear is entirely make-believe. Again, this is not real and is entirely fictional. Do not be scared. The zombie apocalypse has not started yet. The voices you will hear are not those of real individuals. They have been generated entirely through artificial intelligence. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, especially dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. Enjoy the show.
Good evening, Badger Creek. I'm Leon Redfield with Channel 7 News. We begin tonight with a look at your local headlines. President Chris Kennedy is on the move this week, making a stop in Chicago as part of his cross-country tour promoting new infrastructure and economic growth programs. In business news, Badger Creek-based Aperture Pharmaceuticals has announced that its much-anticipated new prescription drug Veritol is expected to reach the market by the end of the season. Company officials say the treatment could mark a breakthrough in managing chronic pain, and local pharmacies are already preparing for demand. Here at home, City Council members voted last night to approve funding for the long-discussed expansion of the Badger Creek Community Center, which will include a new gymnasium and youth activity wing. Police are also reporting a curious situation along the Pine Hollow hiking trail near the old Doyle Mansion, where several dead animals have been found in recent weeks. Officials have not confirmed a cause, but say there is no immediate risk to the public. Meanwhile, Officer Sam Spade of the Badger Creek Police Department has been honored this week for his quick action during a roadside accident, pulling 2 passengers from a burning vehicle before first responders arrived. The mayor praised him as a shining example of public service and dedication. And finally, the Badger Creek Wildcats pulled off a narrow win in high school football, defeating their longtime rivals in a nail-biting finish that had fans on their feet until the last whistle. For more on today's conditions and what to expect this weekend, we go now to Melanie Daniels with the weather.
Thanks, Leon. After a mild start to the week, the weather is shifting across Badger Creek tonight. Heavy clouds are already rolling in, and we're expecting scattered thunderstorms through the evening. Looking ahead, conditions will remain unsettled for the next few days, with repeated rounds of rain, strong winds, and the possibility of localized flooding in low-lying areas. Temperatures will dip slightly as the storm front lingers, with cool nights and damp mornings expected well into the weekend. Residents are encouraged to secure outdoor items and use caution when traveling, especially on rural roads where visibility may be reduced. Try and stay dry out there. Back to you, Leon.
Thank you, Melanie. Still ahead, we'll take a closer look at preparations for the county fair and how the community center expansion could impact families in our area. Stay with us. Good evening, I'm Leon Redfield with Channel 7 News, and tonight we're following developing reports of unusual animal attacks in the rural areas surrounding Badger Creek. Over the past week, local authorities have received multiple calls regarding aggressive wildlife behavior, with several hikers reporting encounters with what they describe as unusually hostile animals near the Doyle Creek trail system. The trail runs adjacent to the Aperture Pharmaceuticals research facility, though company officials say there's no connection between their operations and the recent incidents. 3 hikers who set out on a weekend camping trip in the area have been reported missing since Sunday, prompting a search and rescue operation that's currently underway. Sheriff's deputies discovered their abandoned campsite yesterday morning, with signs of a struggle, but no indication of what might have happened to the missing persons. We now go live to Melanie Daniels, who is at the trailhead where the search efforts are being coordinated.
Thank you, Leon. I'm here at the Doyle Creek trailhead where search teams have been working around the clock to locate the 3 missing hikers. Behind me, you can see the command post that's been set up by the county search and rescue team, and I have to tell you, there's a palpable sense of urgency among the volunteers and officials here. I spoke earlier with longtime Badger Creek resident Tom Morrison, who's been hiking these trails for over 20 years, and he told me he's never seen anything like what's been happening lately. According to Morrison, the wildlife in the area has become increasingly aggressive, with reports of raccoons and even deer attacking without provocation. Just this morning, a park ranger discovered what appeared to be the remains of several small animals that had been, and I quote, torn apart in a way that didn't look natural. The missing hikers are 24-year-old Sarah Chen, 31-year-old Marcus Wright, and 28-year-old Jennifer Thomas, all from the neighboring town of Mill Valley. Their families are asking anyone with information about their whereabouts to contact local authorities immediately. Back to you, Leon.
Thank you, Melanie, and our thoughts are certainly with the families of those missing hikers tonight. The search effort is expected to continue through the weekend, with additional resources being brought in from the state level if necessary. County officials are urging residents to exercise extreme caution when venturing into wooded areas, particularly those near the pharmaceutical research facilities. Well, we now go live to our science correspondent, Nathan Roper, who joins us to discuss what might be causing this unusual animal behavior.
Well, Leon, I must say that while these reports are certainly concerning to the local community, we mustn't let our imaginations run away with us. What we're likely seeing here is a confluence of natural factors that can cause temporary changes in animal behavior patterns. It's not uncommon, particularly during seasonal transitions, for wildlife to become more aggressive due to factors such as food scarcity, territorial disputes, or even disease outbreaks like rabies. The proximity to the research facility is, I'm quite certain, purely coincidental, as Aperture Pharmaceuticals conducts legitimate medical research under strict environmental and safety protocols. These so-called unusual attacks are most likely the result of rabid animals, which would explain both the aggressive behavior and the unfortunate fate of any small animals that may have encountered them. My advice to the community would be to remain calm, avoid contact with any wild animals displaying unusual behavior, and report such sightings to animal control immediately. I'm confident that once the appropriate wildlife management measures are implemented, these incidents will cease entirely.
Thank you, Nathan, for that reassuring perspective. We want to remind our viewers that animal control officers are working closely with the Sheriff's Department to investigate these incidents, and residents should not attempt to approach or capture any aggressive wildlife themselves. The search for the missing hikers will resume at first light tomorrow morning, and we'll continue to follow this developing story. Coming up after the break, we'll have your weekend weather forecast and a look at the upcoming Harvest Festival preparations. For Channel 7 News, I'm Leon Redfield, and we'll be right back. Good evening. I'm Leon Redfield with Channel 7 News, and tonight we're reporting on a disturbing escalation in what authorities are now calling unprovoked attacks occurring throughout the rural communities surrounding Badger Creek. Over the past 48 hours, emergency services have responded to multiple incidents involving individuals who witnesses describe as acting in an extremely aggressive and erratic manner before attacking others, seemingly at random. What makes these cases particularly troubling is that several of the attackers have been identified as residents who had no prior history of violent behavior. And in at least 3 confirmed cases, the individuals were found dead at the scene despite continuing to exhibit what first responders are calling unusual physical activity. Even more concerning, a specialized police unit that was dispatched to investigate the area around the abandoned Doyle Mansion, which serves as a storage facility for Aperture Pharmaceuticals, has failed to report in for over 12 hours. The unit's last transmission came from the immediate vicinity of the mansion, and all attempts to reestablish contact have been unsuccessful. We go now to Melanie Daniels, who is standing by at the police station with more details.
Leon, I'm here at the Badger Creek Police Department, where Sheriff Martinez has just concluded an emergency briefing with state authorities, and I can tell you the atmosphere here is one of barely controlled concern. The missing police unit consists of 4 highly trained officers who were specifically selected for this assignment due to their experience with dangerous situations, making their disappearance all the more troubling. According to sources within the department, the unit was investigating reports of unusual activity at the Doyle Mansion after several residents complained about strange sounds and what they described as people wandering around the property at all hours. Sheriff Martinez confirmed that the officers discovered evidence of forced entry into the building, but beyond that, details remain scarce. What we do know is that the last radio transmission from the unit contained what dispatch described as sounds of distress and an urgent request for backup, followed immediately by radio silence. I spoke with Deputy Collins off the record, and he told me that in his 15 years of law enforcement, he's never seen the kind of injuries they're dealing with in these attack cases. According to Collins, the victims are found with what appears to be human bite marks, and the attackers themselves show signs of extreme physical trauma that should have been incapacitating, yet they continue to exhibit violent behavior until they were neutralized. Back to you, Leon.
Thank you, Melanie. And we want to emphasize that authorities are treating this as an active investigation with potential public safety implications. In response to these incidents, the county has implemented enhanced security measures and is advising all residents to remain indoors after sunset until further notice. We will now read a statement by Harry Cooper, Director of Public Relations for Aperture Pharmaceuticals, to address concerns about the proximity of these incidents to company facilities. We want to begin by expressing our deepest concern for the missing officers and their families during this difficult time. However, I must categorically state that Aperture Pharmaceuticals has absolutely no involvement in these tragic events, and any suggestion of a connection between our legitimate medical research and these incidents is both unfounded and irresponsible. The Doyle Mansion serves purely as a secure storage facility for archived research materials and equipment, nothing more, and our security protocols ensure that there is no possibility of any materials posing a risk to the surrounding community. We have fully cooperated with law enforcement throughout this investigation, providing access to our facilities and personnel as requested, and we will continue to do so. What we're seeing here appears to be an unfortunate series of coincidences that have created unnecessary panic among residents, and I would urge everyone to rely on official sources of information rather than speculation and rumors. And Aperture Pharmaceuticals has been a responsible corporate citizen in this community for over a decade, contributing to local economic development while conducting research that has the potential to benefit millions of people worldwide. We remain committed to transparency and will address any legitimate concerns that arise during this investigation. That was a statement just released by Aperture Pharmaceuticals. We want to remind our viewers that the search for the missing police unit is expected to intensify tomorrow morning with the arrival of additional resources from the state police and National Guard units. Residents are strongly urged to report any unusual activity or sightings immediately and to avoid the areas around Doyle Creek Trail and the abandoned mansion until the investigation is complete. We'll continue to monitor this developing situation and provide updates as they become available. Coming up after the break, we'll have a special report on emergency preparedness measures that families can take during uncertain times. This is Leon Redfield with Channel 7 News. We'll be right back.
Wake up, people. Wake up before it's too late, because what's happening in Badger Creek right now is not some random outbreak of rabid animals or mysterious illness like the mainstream media wants you to believe. This is a planned operation, a beta test for the New World Order's depopulation agenda, and they're using American citizens as guinea pigs for their biological weapons program. I've been warning you about this for years, and now it's happening right in front of our eyes, and the sheep are still buying the official story. Aperture Pharmaceuticals, people, look them up, dig into their connections, follow the money trail, and you'll see they're tied directly to the same globalist cabal that's been planning to reduce the world's population by 80%. They didn't just accidentally release some virus. They deliberately infected that town to see how fast their bioweapon would spread and how effectively it would turn ordinary people into mindless killing machines. And the media, the media is complicit in this cover-up. They're feeding you sanitized reports about aggressive behavior and unusual animal attacks, when what they should be telling you is that the dead are walking the streets and hunting the living. I have sources inside the military, people who risk their lives to get me this information. And they're telling me that the special forces units they sent in to investigate that mansion, they found evidence of underground laboratories, human experimentation chambers, and mass graves filled with test subjects who didn't survive the initial trials. This isn't the first time they've done this. It's just the first time they couldn't contain it fast enough to keep it out of the news cycle. The so-called experts they're putting on television, these government scientists and company spokesmen, they're all part of the same system that created this nightmare in the first place. Dr. Nathan Roper, who the media keeps presenting as some kind of independent authority, his research has been funded by the same defense contractors who bankroll Aperture's Black Ops projects. And that company spokesman they keep interviewing, denying any bioweapons research, he's reading from a script written by the same PR firms that covered up Agent Orange and convinced the public that cigarettes were harmless. They want you to believe this is all just an unfortunate accident, but I'm telling you right now that every single aspect of this outbreak was planned monitored and controlled by people who see you and your families as expendable test subjects. The quarantine zones they're setting up, the military checkpoints, the communication blackouts, this is all standard operating procedure for biological warfare containment, not public health measures. They're not trying to protect the population. They're trying to protect their experiment from outside interference while they gather data on infection rates, mutation patterns, and the effectiveness of their new biological weapons delivery system. And when they're done collecting their data, when they've learned everything they need to know about how to deploy this weapon on a larger scale, they're going to eliminate every witness, every survivor, every piece of evidence that could expose what they've done. The helicopters circling that town aren't rescue aircraft. They're surveillance platforms documenting the results of their field test. The government officials who are supposed to be investigating this crisis, half of them are on Aperture's payroll and the other half are too scared to speak the truth because they know what happens to whistleblowers in this country. But here's what they didn't count on. Here's what their computer models and focus groups couldn't predict. The American people are waking up. We're not going to sit quietly while they turn our neighbors into monsters and our cities into testing grounds for their depopulation weapons. Every day, more people are seeing through their lies. More people are connecting the dots between the mysterious deaths, the cover-ups, the financial connections between pharmaceutical companies and military contractors. They thought they could control the narrative with their corporate media puppets, but the truth is spreading faster than their virus, and they're panicking because they know their whole house of cards is about to collapse. This is our moment, people. This is when we stand up and say, no more. No more secret experiments on innocent civilians. No more biological weapons tested on American soil. No more genocide disguised as public health emergencies. Document everything you see. Share everything you learn, because they're going to try to scrub this story from the internet and wipe it from the history books just like they've done with every other atrocity they've committed. Stock up on supplies. Arm yourselves. Protect your families, because if they're willing to do this to Badger Creek, they're willing to do it to any town, any city, any community that serves their research purposes.
Good evening. I'm Leon Redfield, and tonight we have significant developments in the ongoing investigation surrounding the missing police officers and the escalating incidents of violence in our community. Approximately 6 hours ago, 2 members of the missing 4-person police unit returned to town in a state that authorities are describing as severely traumatized, and their initial statements have prompted an immediate expansion of the investigation. According to preliminary reports, officers Janet Mills and Sam Spade were found walking along Route 47, approximately 3 miles from the Doyle mansion, suffering from multiple injuries and exhibiting signs of extreme psychological distress. What they've told investigators has led to the implementation of expanded quarantine measures around several key locations, and federal authorities have now joined the investigation under what they're calling a potential biological hazard protocol. The whereabouts of the 2 remaining officers, Sergeant Kevin Hayes and Detective Jill Wesker, remain unknown, and the search area has been expanded to include the entire wooded region surrounding the Aperture Pharmaceuticals facilities. We go now to Melanie Daniels, who has been following this story from the beginning and has obtained exclusive details about what the surviving officers reported.
Leon, I've just finished speaking with sources close to the investigation, and I have to tell you what I'm about to report is both disturbing and frankly difficult to believe. According to my sources, officers Mills and Spade have provided consistent accounts of what they encountered at the Doyle mansion, and their statements have sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community. The officers report that upon entering the mansion, they discovered evidence of what they describe as an unauthorized biological research operation with laboratory equipment that appeared to have been hastily abandoned and multiple containment units that had been damaged or destroyed. More troubling, they claim to have encountered individuals inside the facility who exhibited behavior they describe as predatory and inhuman, including what Officer Mills characterized as people who should have been dead but kept trying to attack us. According to their statement, the unit was forced to defend themselves against what Spade described as infected individuals who moved like animals and seemed to feel no pain. And during the encounter, both Sergeant Hayes and Detective Wesker were reportedly separated from the group. Perhaps most disturbing, the officers claim they discovered the remains of several animals on the property, including what appeared to be dogs that had been changed in some way and continued to exhibit aggressive behavior despite obvious fatal injuries. Medical personnel who examined both Mills and Spade did not find any evidence of human bite marks, and neither officer has shown signs of illness or infection at this time. Back to you, Leon.
Thank you, Melanie, and I want to emphasize that authorities are treating these statements seriously while continuing to investigate all aspects of this situation. The implications of what these officers are reporting have led to unprecedented cooperation between local, state, and federal agencies, and residents should be aware that additional security measures are being implemented as we speak. We're now joined by Dr. Nathan Roper, our science correspondent, who has been reviewing the available evidence and can provide some scientific perspective on these claims.
Leon, I must say that while I've been following this situation closely, the reports from these officers represent a significant escalation that cannot be simply dismissed as stress-induced hallucinations. The description of unauthorized biological research activities at the Doyle Mansion is particularly concerning, as it suggests the possibility of an uncontrolled pathogen release, which would explain both the aggressive behavior patterns we've been observing and the apparent continuation of motor functions in deceased individuals. From the forensic evidence I've been able to review, we're looking at what appears to be a biological agent that affects the central nervous system in a way that could theoretically maintain basic motor functions while destroying higher cognitive processes. The bite transmission method that the officers described is consistent with certain types of viral pathogens, and if we are indeed dealing with an engineered biological agent, the implications for public health are extremely serious. Based on the documents that were reportedly recovered from the facility, there are indications that this research may have been conducted outside of proper regulatory oversight, and the containment breach that apparently occurred could have been the result of inadequate safety protocols. I would strongly advise that anyone who has been in contact with individuals exhibiting aggressive or unusual behavior should seek immediate medical attention, and under no circumstances should anyone attempt to approach or assist individuals who appear to be injured but are still mobile.
Dr. Roper, that's certainly a sobering assessment, and we want to stress that viewers should take these warnings seriously. Authorities are asking residents to remain calm but vigilant, and anyone who observes unusual behavior or encounters individuals who may be infected should immediately contact emergency services and avoid direct contact. The search for the two missing officers continues, and federal health officials are expected to arrive tomorrow morning to begin comprehensive testing of the affected areas. We'll have continuing coverage of this developing situation throughout the evening, and we'll interrupt regular programming with any significant updates. This is Leon Redfield with Channel 7 News, and we'll be back with more coverage after this brief break.
Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Veil. I'm your host, Roger Thornhill, and today we're diving deep into something that's been absolutely blowing up my inbox for the past week. If you've been following the news out of Badger Creek, you know there's some seriously weird stuff going down with these so-called animal attacks and missing police officers. But what you might not know is that I've been contacted by someone claiming to have inside information about Aperture Pharmaceuticals, the company that's been getting mentioned in all these reports. Now, I've got to be careful here because this person is risking everything by coming forward, so we're going to call them David to protect their identity. David reached out to me claiming to be a former employee of Aperture, and what they've told me is absolutely insane. We're talking about unauthorized biological weapons research, cover-ups that go all the way to the top, and experiments that sound like something out of a horror movie. So, David, thank you for joining me today, and I know this can't be easy for you.
Roger, thank you for having me, and you're right, this isn't easy, but people need to know what's really happening. I worked at Aperture for almost 3 years as a lab technician, and what I saw in those facilities would keep you awake at night. The public face of Aperture is all about developing life-saving medications and breakthrough treatments, but that's just the cover story for what they're really doing. About 18 months ago, I was transferred to a project they called Lazarus Protocol, and I thought it was about developing treatments for degenerative diseases, maybe something to help with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. What I found out was that they were working on something completely different, a biological agent that could reanimate dead tissue and override the normal shutdown of nervous system functions after clinical death. The official story was that this could help preserve organs for transplant or maybe even reverse the effects of cardiac arrest, but the real applications were much darker. They had contracts with entities I couldn't identify, people who weren't interested in saving lives, but in creating something that could be weaponized.
Wow, okay, so you're saying they were literally trying to bring dead things back to life? That sounds absolutely insane, but given what we're seeing in the news reports, it's starting to make a terrifying kind of sense. Can you tell me more about this Lazarus protocol? Like, how does something like that even work?
The science behind it is actually relatively straightforward, which is what makes it so dangerous. They developed a synthetic virus that targets specific neurotransmitter pathways in the brain, essentially hijacking the body's motor functions while suppressing higher cognitive processes like pain response, self-preservation, and rational thought. The infected subjects would maintain basic locomotion and aggressive instincts, but everything that makes them human would be gone. During the testing phase, we used laboratory animals first, and the results were horrifying. Mice that had been clinically dead for hours would suddenly start moving again, but they were different, predatory in a way that mice never are naturally. When we moved to larger test subjects, the results became even more disturbing. The subjects would attack anything that moved, and normal methods of restraint or sedation were completely ineffective because their pain receptors had been essentially disabled. The only way to stop them was to destroy the brain tissue completely, which tells you everything you need to know about what we were really creating.
Jesus Christ, that's absolutely terrifying. So you're telling me that this virus can basically turn living things into what, zombies? And you think that's what's happening in Badger Creek right now?
Roger, I don't think it. I know it. 3 weeks ago, there was a containment breach at the Doyle facility, and management went into full damage control mode. They told us it was just a minor equipment malfunction, but I saw the cleanup crews that came in, and these weren't regular hazmat teams. These were military specialists with equipment I'd never seen before, and they were treating this like a potential extinction-level event. The next day, all of us who had worked on Lazarus Protocol were either transferred to other projects or, in my case, suddenly laid off for budget reasons. But here's the thing. The virus they developed is incredibly contagious through fluid contact, especially saliva, and it has an incubation period that varies depending on the individual's immune system. Once someone is infected, the transformation can happen anywhere from a few hours to several days, and during that time, they might seem perfectly normal until the virus reaches critical mass in their nervous system. What's happening in Badger Creek isn't random animal attacks or isolated incidents of violence. It's the beginning of an outbreak of something that could spread beyond containment if it's not stopped immediately.
This is unbelievable, but it explains so much about what we're hearing in the news reports. The aggressive behavior, the bite marks, the fact that people are continuing to move even after they should be incapacitated. David, what can people do to protect themselves, and why are you coming forward now?
I'm coming forward because I can't live with the knowledge that I helped create something that could potentially wipe out humanity, and because the people in charge of this disaster have no intention of taking responsibility for what they've done. As for protection, people need to understand that this isn't like a normal disease where you can take antibiotics or wait for your immune system to fight it off. If you're bitten or come into contact with infected bodily fluids, you need to seek immediate medical attention, though honestly, I don't think there's an effective treatment yet. The best protection is avoidance. Stay away from anyone exhibiting unusual aggressive behavior. Don't try to help people who appear to be injured but are still moving around, and if you see groups of people acting in a coordinated, predatory manner, run. Most importantly, don't trust anything that Aperture Pharmaceuticals or their representatives tell you about this situation. They'll claim it's contained, they'll say it's not their fault, they'll promise that they're working on a solution, but the truth is they've lost control of something that was never meant to exist in the first place.
David, I can't thank you enough for having the courage to come forward with this information, and I hope our listeners understand the risks you're taking to get this truth out there. This has been absolutely mind-blowing, and honestly, I'm not sure I'm going to sleep well tonight knowing what we've just discussed. For everyone listening, I want you to take this seriously, share this information with people you care about, and stay safe out there. We're going to continue following this story, and if anyone else has information about what's really happening with Aperture Pharmaceuticals or the situation in Badger Creek, please reach out to me through the usual channels. David, is there anything else you think people need to know?
Just this, Roger. What's happening in Badger Creek is just the beginning. Aperture has facilities in at least 6 other states, and if they're conducting similar research at those locations, this could spread faster than anyone imagines. The government response you're seeing isn't just about containing a local outbreak, it's about preventing a national catastrophe. People need to be prepared for the possibility that their own communities could be next, and they need to understand that when this virus reaches a certain saturation point in the population, containment becomes impossible. I pray that I'm wrong about how far this could spread, but based on what I know about the science behind it, we may be looking at the end of civilization as we know it.
Folks, that's all the time we have for today, but this conversation has been absolutely critical, and I want everyone to take David's warning seriously. Keep your eyes open, trust your instincts, and remember that sometimes the most unbelievable explanations are the ones closest to the truth. This has been Beyond the Veil. I'm Roger Thornhill, and we'll be back next week with more stories that they don't want you to hear. Stay safe out there, everyone.
This is Leon Redfield with Channel 7 News, and we're coming to you from our emergency broadcasting center as the situation in Badger Creek has escalated beyond all previous expectations. Within the past 12 hours, Badger Creek General Hospital has declared a state of emergency as they've been overwhelmed with victims of what medical personnel are now describing as a widespread outbreak of violent behavior. According to hospital administrator Dr. Sarah Mitchell, emergency rooms throughout the county are dealing with injuries unlike anything they've seen before, with bite wounds, lacerations, and trauma patterns that suggest coordinated attacks by groups of individuals. Even more disturbing, multiple healthcare workers have reported incidents where patients who were declared deceased have subsequently exhibited signs of movement and aggressive behavior, requiring what Dr. Mitchell described as unprecedented security measures. The National Guard has been deployed to assist with crowd control and medical transport, but reports from the field suggest that even trained military personnel are struggling to contain what appears to be a rapidly spreading contagion. We're going to attempt to connect with our field reporter Melanie Daniels, who was last reported to be en route to the hospital with a police escort.
Leon, I'm here outside Badger Creek General, and I have to tell you, what I'm seeing defies rational explanation. The hospital grounds are surrounded by military vehicles, and there are armed guards at every entrance, which is standard protocol for a biological hazard situation. But what's not standard is the constant sound of gunfire coming from inside the building. I've spoken with several National Guard personnel who confirm that they've been authorized to use lethal force against individuals who exhibit what they're calling post-mortem aggressive behavior, which is military speak for shooting people who should already be dead. A few minutes ago, I witnessed an incident that I'm still trying to process. A group of what appeared to be patients in hospital gowns emerged from a side entrance, moving in a coordinated manner toward a group of paramedics who were unloading an ambulance. Patients moved with a kind of predatory focus that was unlike anything I've ever seen in human behavior. And when the paramedics tried to approach them to offer assistance, the patients attacked with what can only be described as animalistic ferocity. Security forces responded immediately, but it took multiple shots to stop each individual. And even then, some continued to exhibit movement until they sustained what appeared to be massive head trauma. Leon, I've covered disasters and violent crimes for over 10 years, but what I'm witnessing here suggests that we're dealing with something that goes beyond normal human pathology. Back to you.
Thank you, Melanie. And we want to emphasize that viewers should avoid the hospital area and all medical facilities until further notice. The mayor's office has issued an emergency declaration requiring all residents to remain in their homes and to report any suspicious activity through the emergency hotline that's been established. We're now joined by Mayor Claire Johnson, who is coordinating the municipal response to this crisis from the Emergency Operations Center.
Leon, thank you for having me, and I want to begin by urging all residents to remain calm while taking the situation with the utmost seriousness. Based on the information we've received from state and federal health officials, we are dealing with what appears to be a biological pathogen that affects normal brain function and can be transmitted through direct contact with infected individuals. The aggressive behavior patterns that people are observing are the result of this pathogen's effect on the central nervous system, and while the affected individuals may appear to be deceased, they retain basic motor functions and predatory instincts. We have implemented a comprehensive curfew effective immediately, and anyone found outside their residence without proper authorization will be detained for their own safety and the safety of others. I also want to address the rumors that have been circulating about Aperture Pharmaceuticals and their potential connection to this outbreak. While our investigation is ongoing, I can confirm that we have discovered evidence suggesting that unauthorized research activities may have been conducted at their facilities, and we are working with federal authorities to determine the full extent of their involvement. The company has been less than forthcoming in their cooperation with our investigation, and I want to assure the public that we will hold them fully accountable for any role they may have played in this disaster.
Mayor Johnson, that's certainly a strong statement regarding Aperture Pharmaceuticals, and we appreciate your commitment to transparency during this crisis. For our viewers, we want to emphasize the critical importance of following all emergency protocols, avoiding contact with anyone exhibiting unusual behavior, and reporting any incidents immediately to authorities. The situation remains fluid, and we will continue to provide updates as they become available throughout the night. Medical officials are warning that anyone who has been bitten or has come into direct contact with bodily fluids from infected individuals should seek immediate medical attention, though they advise calling ahead before approaching any medical facility. This is Leon Redfield with Channel 7 News, and we'll continue our emergency coverage throughout the evening. Stay safe, stay indoors, and stay tuned for further developments. This is Leon Redfield reporting from our secure location as the main Channel 7 studios have been evacuated due to what military officials are calling a complete breakdown of civil order in downtown Badger Creek. I'm receiving reports from multiple sources that the streets of our city have been overrun by groups of infected individuals, and normal law enforcement response has proven completely inadequate to contain the situation. The police department has officially ceased operations after losing contact with most of their patrol units, and the National Guard has established a perimeter around the affected areas with orders to prevent anyone from entering or leaving. We've lost contact with our field reporter, Melanie Daniels, who was last reported to be attempting to reach the police station for an update on the situation there. Her last transmission came approximately 2 hours ago, and all attempts to reestablish communication have been unsuccessful. Military commanders have confirmed that they are treating this as a containment operation with authorization to use all necessary force to prevent the spread of what they're now officially calling a biological hazard. For residents who are still in their homes, please understand that leaving your secure location is not recommended under any circumstances, as the infected individuals appear to be drawn to movement and sound. Before we lost contact, this is the last transmission we received from Melanie.
Leon, this is Melanie. I'm not sure if you're getting this transmission, but I'm currently barricaded inside the police station with 3 officers and maybe a dozen civilians who made it here before the streets became completely impassable. The situation out there is beyond anything we could have imagined. The infected aren't just wandering aimlessly, they're everywhere. Swarms of them filling the streets, smashing through anything that gets in their way, drawn to the slightest sound or movement. Officer Rodriguez, who's been with the department for 12 years, said he's never seen anything like it, the way they just keep coming, slamming themselves against cars, doors, and windows until something breaks. About an hour ago, we watched from the second-floor windows as a horde poured into the hardware store across the street. They didn't search, they just crashed through the front glass in a frenzy, clawing at everything that moved until the screaming finally stopped. I don't think we're going to be able to get out of here. The infected have surrounded this building and we can hear them pounding on the doors and walls. The officers here are saying that rescue isn't coming, that the military has written off anyone still inside the containment zone.
Melanie, if you can hear this, we're going to continue trying to coordinate rescue efforts with military commanders. Please stay safe and keep transmitting if possible. For our viewers, what you just heard represents the most direct account we've received of the situation inside the affected areas, and I want to emphasize that Melanie Daniels is one of the most experienced and reliable journalists I've ever worked with. The reports of relentless attacks and swarming behavior among the infected align with information we're receiving from other sources, and it suggests that this biological agent shuts down higher brain function entirely, leaving only primal hunger and violent reflexes. We're now joined by Dr. Nathan Roper, who has been analyzing the available scientific data about this outbreak and can provide some insight into what might be causing these terrifying symptoms.
Leon, based on the evidence I've been able to review, including tissue samples and blood work from the early victims, what we're dealing with is far more sophisticated than anything I initially anticipated. The pathogen appears to be an engineered virus that targets specific regions of the brain, responsible for pain response, fear reaction, and higher reasoning, while leaving intact the neural pathways that control basic motor functions and raw aggression. What's particularly disturbing is that the virus seems to heighten certain primal drives, creating individuals who are essentially insatiable feeding machines with no capacity for self-preservation or rational thought. The overwhelming force and sheer persistence that Miss Daniels described are consistent with what we might see in rabid animal outbreaks. where the infected act on instinct alone, attacking anything that moves, until either the target or the host is destroyed. From the documents recovered from the Aperture facilities, it's clear this was not an accidental mutation, but a deliberately engineered biological weapon designed to erase fear, erase hesitation, and replace it with uncontrollable violence. The speed of transmission and the rapid onset of symptoms suggest that whoever created this virus intended it to spread through a population with terrifying efficiency, overwhelming any conventional response. Leon, I have to be honest with you and your viewers, based on the rate of infection we're seeing and the inability of standard containment measures to slow its spread, I don't believe this outbreak can be stopped using traditional methods. The only way to prevent this from spreading beyond Badger Creek may require measures that no one wants to even speak aloud.
Dr. Roper, that's certainly a sobering assessment, and we appreciate your candid analysis of this situation. Military officials have announced that they will be conducting a press briefing tomorrow morning to address the current containment efforts and discuss potential next steps in their response to this crisis. For residents who are still in secure locations, please continue to follow all safety protocols, avoid making unnecessary noise, and do not attempt to leave your current position under any circumstances. We will continue to broadcast emergency information as long as our equipment remains operational, and we encourage everyone to stay tuned for any updates from official sources. Our thoughts and prayers are with everyone affected by this tragedy, including our colleague Melanie Daniels and all the brave first responders who have put themselves at risk to help others during this crisis. This is Leon Redfield with Channel 7 News, and we'll continue our emergency coverage throughout the night.
Brothers and sisters, we gather here today not in celebration, but in the shadow of God's terrible wrath that has descended upon our community like the plagues of Egypt. What we are witnessing in these dark hours is not some random calamity or scientific accident, but the righteous judgment of the Almighty upon a nation that has turned its back on His holy commandments and embraced the godless pursuit of knowledge that was never meant for mortal man. For decades, we have allowed the merchants of death to set up their laboratories in our midst, playing God with the very essence of life itself, creating abominations that mock the sacred order of creation. We have permitted these modern-day sorcerers to twist the building blocks of life into weapons of destruction, and now the Lord has allowed their evil to be unleashed upon us as a testament to the consequences of our collective sin. The book of Revelation warns us of the time when the dead shall rise and the earth shall be filled with torment. And I tell you that time has come to pass in our very streets. These creatures that walk among us, these shells of humanity driven by unholy hunger, they are the physical manifestation of spiritual death that has consumed our society. We have worshipped at the altar of science and technology, believing that man's wisdom could surpass the divine plan. And now we reap the bitter harvest of our prideful rebellion against the Creator of all things. The Lord God is not mocked, and what a man soweth, that shall he also reap. And we are reaping the whirlwind of our own making. But hear me now, you who still draw breath and possess souls that can be saved from the eternal damnation that awaits the unrepentant. This plague that has befallen us is not merely a physical calamity, but a spiritual test that will separate the wheat from the chaff, the faithful from the faithless, those who will stand with the Lord in the final days from those who will be consumed by the darkness of their own choosing. The walking dead that prowl our streets are a mirror held up to show us what we have already become in our hearts. Spiritually dead beings going through the motions of life while our souls rot within us from the poison of secular humanism and godless materialism. These creatures feel no pain because they have no souls. They know no mercy because they have rejected the source of all mercy. They hunt in packs because they have become as beasts of the field, driven by base instincts without the divine spark that separates man from animal. And I tell you that many who still walk among the living are no different, for they too have rejected the salvation that comes only through faith in Jesus Christ. They too have chosen to follow the broad path that leads to destruction, rather than the narrow gate that leads to eternal life. The scientists who created this abomination, the government officials who allowed it to happen, the citizens who stood idly by while evil flourished in our community, they are all complicit in bringing about this judgment upon our land. But there is still time, there is still hope for those who will humble themselves before the throne of grace and cry out for the mercy that flows from the cross of Calvary. The hour is late, my brothers and sisters, later than we dared to imagine, and the forces of darkness are closing in around us like the armies of Pharaoh pursuing the children of Israel to the shores of the Red Sea. But just as Moses stretched out his hand and the waters parted to provide a path of deliverance for God's chosen people, so too can the Lord provide refuge for those who call upon His name in genuine repentance and faith. Do not put your trust in military might or scientific solutions, for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. The government may promise you rescue, the experts may claim they have answers, but I tell you that salvation comes from no earthly source. It comes only from the one who conquered death itself and rose again on the third day. These creatures that surround us may be able to destroy the body, but they cannot touch the soul that belongs to Christ Jesus. And though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we will fear no evil if our hope is anchored in the eternal promises of God. Repent therefore of your sins, turn from the wicked ways that have brought this calamity upon us, accept Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior, and though the world may perish around us, though the dead may rise from their graves, though the very foundations of civilization may crumble into dust, you will have a hope that extends beyond this temporal existence into the glorious eternity that awaits all who are washed in the blood of the Lamb. The time for lukewarm Christianity is over. The time for casual faith has passed. Now is the hour when we must choose whom we will serve. And I pray that you will choose this day to serve the Lord with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. For tomorrow may be too late, and the opportunity for salvation may be lost forever in the chaos that is yet to come.
All right, we're back, and I've got Officer Sam Spade here with me today. And Sam, what you're about to tell people is going to sound absolutely insane, but I've seen the photos you brought, I've looked at the documents, and holy shit, this is real. So for people who don't know, Sam was part of the special police unit that went looking for those missing hikers near the old Doyle mansion, and what he found there, well, Sam, just start from the beginning. Tell people what happened when you guys first got to that mansion.
Roger, I've been a cop for 15 years. I've seen overdoses, domestic violence, car accidents, all the worst stuff you can imagine, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what we found in that place. So we get the call about these missing hikers, right? 3 college kids who were doing some kind of nature photography project in the woods near the old Doyle property. The mansion's been abandoned for decades, but we knew Aperture Pharmaceuticals had been using it for storage or something, had some kind of lease agreement with the county. My partner Dave Sullivan and I were with Sergeant Martinez and Officer Wesker, 4 of us total. And we're thinking this is going to be a routine search and rescue. Maybe the kids got lost, maybe they're injured somewhere. But when we get to the mansion, Roger, the front door is wide open and there's this smell coming from inside, like meat that's been left out in the sun for weeks. And the weird thing is, there are fresh tire tracks in the driveway, multiple vehicles, but no cars anywhere to be seen.
So you guys just walked right in? I mean, what's the protocol when you're dealing with something like that?
We should have called for backup, should have waited for hazmat teams, but we figured we were just looking for missing kids, you know? So we go in with our standard gear, flashlights, radios, service weapons, and the first floor looks normal. Just old furniture covered in dust sheets, typical abandoned mansion stuff. But then we find this elevator hidden behind a bookshelf, and this thing is clearly new, modern security keypad, the whole 9 yards. Martinez finds a key card on the floor, probably dropped by whoever evacuated this place in a hurry. And when we swipe it, the elevator takes us down 3 floors underground 3 floors, Roger. Underneath this old mansion, and when those doors open, we're looking at a fully operational research laboratory. All white walls and stainless steel like something out of a science fiction movie. But the power's been cut, emergency lighting only, and there are papers scattered everywhere, computers smashed like someone was trying to destroy evidence before they ran.
Jesus Christ. And this is all under a mansion that's supposed to be abandoned. What kind of research were they doing down there?
That's when things got really bad, Roger. We start exploring these corridors, and there are holding cells, actual prison cells with reinforced glass doors, and inside some of them, God, I still have nightmares about this. There are people in there, or what used to be people, and they're moving around, but they're clearly dead. Pale skin, cloudy eyes, and when they see us, they start throwing themselves against the glass, making these horrible moaning sounds. Wesker thinks maybe they're sick, some kind of drug reaction, but Martinez, he's a military veteran, and he takes one look at these things and says, those aren't sick people, those are corpses. And he's right, because we can see bite marks on some of them, chunks of flesh missing, wounds that should have killed them, but somehow they're still moving around. We find a computer terminal that's still working, and Sullivan starts going through the files while the rest of us secure the area. What he finds, Roger, it's documentation of something called the Z virus project, detailed reports on human test subjects, infection rates, behavioral modifications in the reanimated specimens.
Wait. So you're telling me Aperture Pharmaceuticals was conducting illegal human experiments in this underground facility? And they were actually creating zombies? I mean, that's what we're talking about here, right?
That's exactly what we're talking about, but it gets worse. Sullivan finds these research notes talking about field testing parameters and controlled release scenarios, and there's a whole section about using the local population for what they call real-world efficacy studies. They weren't just experimenting on random test subjects, Roger. They were planning to release this virus into Badger Creek to see how it would spread in an actual community. And then we hear this sound like metal scraping against concrete, and we realize one of the cell doors has been damaged, probably during the evacuation, and whatever was inside has gotten out. Martinez tells us to stick together, weapons drawn, and we start making our way back toward the elevator, but that's when we encounter them in the corridor. 5 or 6 of these things shambling toward us, and they don't respond to verbal commands, don't react to warning shots, they just keep coming. We had to put them down, Roger, headshots, because body shots didn't stop them, and even after they dropped, some of them kept trying to crawl toward us.
That's insane, Sam. So what happened to the rest of your team? You said only 2 of you made it out.
We got separated when more of those things came out of a side corridor, probably drawn by the gunfire. Wesker and Martinez went one way, Sullivan and I went the other, and we agreed to meet back at the elevator. But when we got there, we could hear commotion from deeper in the facility, and then it went quiet. Sullivan wanted to go back for them, but I could see more movement in the shadows, and I made the call to get out while we could. We rode that elevator up in complete silence, grabbed as many of those research files as we could carry, and got the hell out of there. When we reached the car, the engine wouldn't turn over. Someone had disabled it. That's when we heard the howling. Infected dogs came tearing out of the tree line, drawn by our scent and the noise we'd already made. We put down as many as we could, but only with headshots, and then we bolted into the woods. I remember shouting into the radio, calling for backup, but there was no way we could stay, not with the horde closing in. Branches tore at us as we ran, the dogs snapping at our heels, until finally the sounds of pursuit thinned out. We'd shaken them, but we were scattered, exhausted, and stumbling blind through the dark.
Wow. And these documents you brought, these prove that Aperture was developing biological weapons?
Roger, what I've got here is proof that a major pharmaceutical company was conducting illegal human experimentation and developing weapons of mass destruction on American soil. They had detailed plans for releasing this virus into civilian populations. They had studied exactly how many people would need to die before the infection reached what they called sustainable propagation levels, and they had contingency plans for covering up their involvement if things went wrong. And now Badger Creek is being overrun by exactly the kind of creatures we encountered in that underground laboratory. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't some random outbreak. This was a deliberate act of bioterrorism by people who see American citizens as expendable test subjects. I'm risking my life by coming on your show and talking about this, but people need to know the truth about what's really happening, because if they can do this to Badger Creek, they can do it to any town in America.
Sam, this is absolutely incredible, and I know our listeners are going to want to see these documents for themselves. We're going to post everything on the website after we scrub any information that could put you in danger. But people need to understand that what you're describing isn't science fiction. This is real biological warfare being conducted against American civilians. Any final thoughts for people who might think this sounds too crazy to be true?
Roger, I wish this was crazy. I wish this was just some conspiracy theory that we could laugh about and move on. But I've seen those creatures with my own eyes. I've held the research documents in my hands, and I've watched the government cover up the truth to protect the people responsible. If you have family in areas near aperture facilities, get them out now, because this is just the beginning. And if you think the official story about animal attacks and mysterious illnesses makes sense, ask yourself why they're not allowing any independent investigators into the quarantine zone, and why every expert they put on television has financial ties to the same companies that created this nightmare.
This is Leon Redfield with what may be our final broadcast from the Channel 7 Emergency Center, as we've received word that the military is preparing to evacuate all remaining media personnel from the containment zone via helicopter transport within the next few hours. The situation in Badger Creek has deteriorated beyond all previous estimates, with entire residential districts now confirmed to be under the complete control of infected individuals. And military commanders have informed us that rescue operations for civilians remaining in these areas have been suspended indefinitely. We have reestablished limited contact with our field reporter Melanie Daniels, who remains barricaded inside the police station with a small group of survivors, and her reports from inside the affected zone paint a picture of systematic collapse that extends far beyond what we initially understood. Federal health officials have arrived on scene and are conducting emergency consultations with military leadership, but preliminary assessments suggest that traditional containment methods may no longer be viable given the scope and speed of the outbreak's expansion. We go now to Melanie Daniels, who has been providing us with first-hand accounts from inside the police station.
Leon, I want to begin by saying that I don't expect to make it out of here alive, so what I'm about to tell you needs to be heard by as many people as possible. The infected have completely surrounded the police station, and there are hundreds of them now, just pressing against every door and window, moaning and clawing at anything they can reach. During the night, we've been listening to them shuffle around the building in endless circles, drawn by our scent and the sound of our voices. But they can't figure out how to get inside because the doors are barricaded. Officer Chen, who's been monitoring radio communications, picked up transmissions indicating that the hospital, fire station, and city hall are all under siege by massive hordes of these creatures, all of them mindlessly drawn to wherever living people are trapped.
Melanie, that report is both heartbreaking and terrifying, and we want you to know that we're doing everything possible to coordinate rescue efforts for you and the other survivors with you. Your courage in continuing to report from inside this crisis is providing critical information that may help save lives in other communities if this situation spreads beyond our area. We're now joined by Harry Cooper from Aperture Pharmaceuticals, who were requested airtime to make a statement regarding their company's role in recent events.
Leon, thank you for this opportunity, and I want to begin by expressing our deepest condolences to the families and friends of everyone who has been affected by this unprecedented tragedy. While investigations into the exact cause of this outbreak are still ongoing, I want to categorically state that Aperture Pharmaceuticals has fully cooperated with federal authorities in providing access to all of our research facilities, personnel records, and scientific data. Any suggestion that our company has engaged in unauthorized biological weapons research or that we bear responsibility for these tragic events is not only false but represents a dangerous distraction from the real work of finding solutions to this crisis. Our team of scientists and medical researchers are working around the clock with government experts to develop potential treatments and containment strategies, and we remain committed to supporting the community during this difficult time. The research conducted at our Badger Creek facility has always been focused on legitimate medical applications, including treatments for neurodegenerative diseases and trauma recovery, and all of our work has been conducted within the bounds of applicable regulations and safety protocols. I understand that in times of crisis people look for someone to blame, but I would urge everyone to focus on supporting the brave first responders and medical professionals who are risking their lives to help others, rather than spreading unfounded conspiracy theories that serve no constructive purpose. Aperture Pharmaceuticals stands ready to provide whatever assistance may be required to resolve this situation and to help our community heal from this tragedy.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper, for that statement, though I think many of our viewers will find your company's claims difficult to reconcile with the evidence that has emerged over the past week. We want to remind everyone that this situation remains extremely fluid, and residents in surrounding communities should remain vigilant for any signs of unusual activity or aggressive behavior among individuals in their areas. Military officials have expanded the containment perimeter to include all areas within a 15-mile radius of Badger Creek, and anyone attempting to cross these boundaries without proper authorization will be subject to detention and medical screening. For families with loved ones still inside the affected zone, we understand your anguish, but please understand that rescue operations cannot be safely conducted at this time due to the extreme danger posed by the infected population. We will continue broadcasting emergency information as long as our equipment remains operational, and we encourage everyone to stay tuned for any updates from official sources. This is Leon Redfield, and may God help us all. This is Leon Redfield reporting from our temporary broadcast center in Mill Valley, approximately 25 miles from the Badger Creek containment zone, and I'm afraid I have devastating news to report about the situation inside the affected area. Military commanders have confirmed that Badger Creek General Hospital has been completely overrun by massive hordes of infected after they were drawn to the building by the sounds of gunfire and screams from inside. According to the last radio transmission from the hospital, thousands of these creatures had surrounded the facility, pressing against every entrance in such numbers that the doors and windows eventually gave way under the sheer weight of bodies. Even more troubling, we've received reports that Mayor Claire Johnson has been missing since yesterday evening when she failed to report for a scheduled emergency meeting with federal officials, and her security detail was found dead at the municipal building, apparently overwhelmed by a massive horde that had been drawn to the area. The loss of local government leadership, combined with the fall of the primary medical facility, has left the remaining survivor groups completely isolated, with no hope of organized rescue or evacuation. Our field reporter, Melanie Daniels, who has been broadcasting from inside the police station, was scheduled to check in with us 30 minutes ago, but we have been unable to reestablish contact with her position. Before we lost contact, we received the following message from Melanie.
Leon, if you can hear this, I need you to know that the police station has been overrun, and I don't think any of us are going to make it out of here alive. About an hour ago, the infected finally broke through the main entrance after hours of mindlessly throwing themselves against the barricades, their sheer numbers eventually overwhelming our defenses. Officer Rodriguez and 2 other officers tried to hold them back with shotguns, but for every one they put down, 10 more pushed through, moaning and clawing, driven by this endless hunger. I'm barricaded in a storage room on the 2nd floor with Mrs. Henderson and a teenage girl named Sarah, whose parents were taken yesterday. We can hear them below us, shuffling through the building, bumping into walls and furniture as they hunt for us. But Leon, the worst part is I saw what used to be Officer Rodriguez among them. His uniform is torn, his face half gone, and he staggers with the same blind hunger as the rest, clawing at our door like he doesn't even know what he's doing. There's nothing left of the man we knew, just a shambling corpse driven by an insatiable need to feed. I need people to understand when these things take someone, that person is gone. There's no mind, no memory, no trace of who they were, only the hunger. If this transmission reaches anyone, tell them this. When someone they love comes back changed, it's not their loved one anymore. It's just a walking corpse wearing their face.
Melanie, if you're still able to hear this broadcast, we're going to continue trying to coordinate with military officials to find a way to extract you and the other survivors from that location. Your reporting has been invaluable in helping people understand the true nature of this threat. And your courage in continuing to broadcast from inside this nightmare is saving lives in communities that may face similar situations. For our viewers, the situation in Badger Creek is now deteriorated to the point where federal authorities are considering what they're calling extreme containment measures to prevent the spread of this pathogen to other population centers. We're now joined by Dr. Nathan Roper, who has been analyzing the behavior patterns of the infected and can provide some insight into what we might expect if this outbreak cannot be contained through conventional means.
Leon, based on the evidence I've been reviewing over the past several days, including the documentation recovered from the Aperture facilities and the observations from survivors like Miss Daniels, I'm afraid we're dealing with a threat that exceeds our current capacity for containment using traditional methods. The infected population in Badger Creek operates purely on instinct, driven by an overwhelming compulsion to hunt and feed on living tissue, but their sheer numbers make them incredibly dangerous even without any intelligence or planning ability. What's particularly disturbing is how quickly the virus spreads through bite transmission, with new infections occurring within minutes of exposure, creating an exponential growth pattern that overwhelms any defensive position. The fall of the hospital represents a catastrophic loss because these creatures are drawn to anywhere people are gathered, and once they detect living humans, they converge on that location in massive hordes until the defenses are simply crushed by weight of numbers. Leon, I have to be brutally honest with you and your viewers. The infection rate in Badger Creek has reached what we call a saturation point, where the infected outnumber the uninfected by such a significant margin that conventional rescue operations are no longer viable. Any attempt to extract survivors would require military resources that could result in soldiers being overwhelmed and infected, potentially spreading the pathogen beyond the current containment zone. Federal authorities are now faced with an impossible choice between sacrificing the remaining survivors in Badger Creek or risking the spread of this engineered pathogen to major population centers where it could potentially end human civilization as we know it.
Dr. Roper, that's certainly a sobering and heartbreaking assessment of the situation. We want our viewers to understand that the federal response teams are working around the clock to explore every possible option for containing this outbreak while minimizing the loss of human life. However, residents in neighboring communities should be prepared for the possibility of expanded evacuation orders and should have emergency supplies and transportation ready in case the situation deteriorates further. We will continue to monitor the situation throughout the night and provide updates as they become available from official sources. Our thoughts and prayers remain with Melanie Daniels and all the brave survivors who are still fighting for their lives inside the containment zone. This is Leon Redfield with Channel 7 News, and may God have mercy on us all.
I told you so. I warned you people weeks ago that this was all planned, that Badger Creek was just the testing ground for something much bigger, and now look what's happening. They're evacuating the news crews. They're pulling back the military. They're abandoning every single innocent person trapped in that city. And do you want to know why? Because this was never about containing an accidental outbreak. This was always about testing their biological weapon under real-world conditions and then eliminating all the evidence along with all the witnesses. Mayor Claire Johnson didn't go missing, folks. She was eliminated because she was asking too many questions about Aperture Pharmaceuticals and their cozy relationship with federal contractors. This isn't about public safety. This isn't about preventing the spread of some accidental plague. This is about covering up the greatest crime against humanity in modern history by burning all the evidence and silencing all the witnesses permanently. They're going to drop bombs on that city, folks. They're going to incinerate thousands of innocent American citizens, and then they're going to tell you it was the only way to save the world from their own deliberate creation. But here's what they don't want you to understand about their master plan. This isn't the end of their biological weapons program. It's just the beginning. Aperture Pharmaceuticals has facilities in 6 other states, maybe more, and every single one of them has been conducting the same kind of research under different code names and shell company fronts. While everyone's focused on the horror show in Badger Creek, they're preparing to release similar pathogens in other locations, creating a series of regional outbreaks that will justify declaring martial law across the entire country. Think about it, people. Once they demonstrate that they're willing to bomb American cities to contain these outbreaks, what's to stop them from declaring any community a threat? Any town that questions government authority, any population that refuses to comply with their mandates, any group of citizens that demands accountability for their crimes, they can just release their biological weapon and then claim they had no choice but to eliminate the entire area for the greater good. This is about establishing a precedent for mass extermination, under the guise of public health emergency, and Badger Creek is just the proof of concept. They're going to tell you that the bombing was a tragedy, but a necessary one. They're going to hold memorial services and talk about the heroic sacrifice of the people of Badger Creek, but it's all lies designed to make you forget that this entire disaster was engineered by the military-industrial complex as part of their ongoing war against human freedom. After they incinerate the evidence in Badger Creek, they're going to use the fear and trauma to pass new legislation that gives them unlimited power to declare biological emergencies, to quarantine entire populations, to eliminate anyone they claim is infected without due process or independent verification. This is the New World Order, people. A world where they can kill thousands of innocent Americans by claiming it's for the greater good. And if we don't wake up right now and demand accountability, if we don't rise up and expose these monsters for what they really are, then Badger Creek won't be the last American city to be erased from the map. The time for peaceful resistance is over. The time for trusting in the system is finished, because the system itself has become the enemy of every decent human being on this planet.
Good evening. I'm Leon Redfield, reporting from our emergency broadcast center in Millfield, 50 miles east of Badger Creek. The local government in Badger Creek has gone completely dark as of 6 hours ago, with all communication lines severed and no response from city officials. Neighboring cities within a 50-mile radius are now implementing full evacuations as military checkpoints have established a strict perimeter around the infected zone. No one is being allowed to leave Badger Creek, and anyone attempting to breach the quarantine line is being turned back by armed National Guard units. We now go live to Melanie Daniels, who managed to reach the mayor's office before communication was lost.
Leon, I'm speaking to you from what remains of Badger Creek City Hall, and the situation here is beyond catastrophic. The city center is completely abandoned, with bodies littering every street as far as the eye can see. My police escort, they didn't make it past the courthouse. Officer Martinez was pulled into an alley by at least 6 of those things, and Sergeant Williams put his gun to his own head rather than let them get to him. I'm now taking shelter in Mayor Johnson's office. And Leon, what I found here changes everything we thought we knew about this outbreak. Mayor Claire Johnson is dead, apparently by her own hand, with a single gunshot wound to the head. But on her desk, I found a suicide note that simply reads, "I'm sorry," along with what appears to be financial documents and correspondence between the mayor's office and Aperture Pharmaceuticals. Leon, these documents show regular payments to the mayor's personal accounts dating back 3 years, along with emails discussing the need to keep certain research activities off the public radar. The last email, dated just 2 weeks ago, mentions concerns about containment protocols and acceptable risk levels for the local population. Back to you, Leon.
Melanie, those are serious allegations you're reporting. Are you saying that Mayor Johnson was aware of dangerous research being conducted at Aperture Pharmaceuticals and was being paid to keep it quiet? Federal authorities have yet to respond to our request for comment, but military aircraft have been spotted moving toward the quarantine zone throughout the day. We now go to Dr. Nathan Roper, who has been analyzing some of the recovered Aperture documents that have been leaked to various news organizations.
Leon, what we're seeing here is far worse than anyone initially imagined. The documents that have surfaced paint a picture of a company that was essentially conducting illegal bioweapons research under the guise of medical advancement. From what I can determine, they developed what they internally called the Z virus, a pathogen designed to reanimate dead tissue while maintaining basic motor functions in the host. The virus appears to have been engineered specifically for military applications, with the ability to create what can only be described as biological weapons that feel no pain, require no food or rest, and continue functioning even after sustaining injuries that would kill a normal person. The accidental release seems to have occurred during a containment breach in their underground research facility. But Leon, here's what's truly terrifying. The virus adapts and evolves rapidly. The reanimation process that initially took hours is now happening in minutes, and there are reports from inside the quarantine zone of infected individuals that appear to be growing larger and stronger the longer they remain active. We cannot stop this pathogen with conventional means, and I strongly urge any survivors still in the affected areas to find the most secure shelter possible and pray that the federal government acts quickly to contain this before it spreads beyond the current perimeter.
Dr. Roper, thank you for that analysis, though I wish the news was more hopeful. We'll continue our coverage of this developing crisis throughout the night with updates every hour on the hour. For those of you in the surrounding counties, please remain calm, stay in your homes, and keep your emergency kits ready. Federal authorities are expected to make an announcement within the next few hours regarding the government's response to what is now being called the Badger Creek incident. This is Leon Redfield, and we'll be back after this brief message. Stay safe and stay tuned.
Brothers and sisters, I stand before you today not in my church, for that sacred ground has been defiled by the walking dead, but here in this abandoned warehouse where the faithful few have gathered to hear the word of the Lord. What we are witnessing is not some accident of science, not some unfortunate laboratory mishap as the talking heads on television would have you believe. This is the hand of the Almighty striking down a generation that has turned its back on righteousness, that has embraced the abominations of man over the sacred laws of God. The dead walking among us, consuming the flesh of the living. This is nothing new under the sun, for did not Ezekiel prophesy of the valley of dry bones? Did not our Lord Jesus himself raise Lazarus from the tomb? But what we see here is not resurrection, it is damnation made manifest. These creatures that hunt our streets are the wages of sin, the price of a society that has elevated science above Scripture, that has made gods of men in white coats who dare to play with the very essence of life and death. Mayor Johnson took 30 pieces of silver from those merchants of death at Aperture Pharmaceuticals, just as Judas betrayed our Savior, and now look what her greed has wrought upon this city. The blood of every innocent victim cries out from the ground, demanding justice, demanding repentance. Oh, you who still draw breath, you who still have beating hearts in your chests, do you not see the signs? For years we have turned from the path of righteousness. We have allowed the scientists and the politicians to convince us that man can improve upon God's creation. We have permitted them to splice genes like playing cards, to manufacture viruses in their laboratories of hubris, to create weapons that can turn brother against brother, mother against child. And now, as the prophet Isaiah warned, our iniquities have separated us from our God, and our sins have hidden his face from us. The very earth rebels against the corruption we have allowed to fester, and the dead rise up as a testament to our collective failure to guard the sanctity of life. I have walked among these streets. I have seen with my own eyes the horror that unfolds when man attempts to usurp the power of the Almighty. Children turning upon their parents with gnashing teeth, husbands devouring wives, the natural order perverted into something so unholy that even the demons in hell must weep at the sight. This is what happens when we build our towers of Babel in the form of research facilities, when we reach toward heaven with needles and test tubes instead of prayer and humility. The Z virus, as they call their unholy creation, is nothing less than a plague sent to humble the proud and bring the mighty low. But hear me now, you remnant of the faithful, for even in this darkest hour there is hope for those who turn from their wicked ways. The Lord is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and he will not abandon those who call upon his name in truth and sincerity. These creatures that stalk our city cannot cross the threshold where true faith dwells, for greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. I have seen it with my own eyes, brothers and sisters, the way they recoil from the cross, the way they flee from the sound of hymns sung in earnest worship. But this protection is not for the lukewarm, not for those who pay lip service to the gospel while living like the world. No, this divine shield covers only those who have truly repented, who have turned from their sins and thrown themselves upon the mercy of God. The time for half measures is over. The time for comfortable Christianity is past. Either you belong wholly to Christ or you belong to the darkness that now walks among us. I call upon you now to examine your hearts, to confess your sins before it is too late. For I tell you truly that worse days are coming. The government will not save you, the military cannot protect you, and science certainly will not deliver you from this evil that they themselves have unleashed. Only the blood of Jesus can wash away the stain of this corruption. Only the power of God can drive back these agents of hell. Fall on your knees, cry out for mercy, and perhaps the Lord will yet spare a remnant from the destruction that is to come. For I have seen the signs, and I tell you that fire will fall from heaven before this plague is ended, and only those who are hidden in the cleft of the rock will survive what is coming. May God have mercy on us all, for surely we deserve none.
This is Leon Redfield with what may be our final broadcast regarding the Badger Creek crisis. All neighboring cities within a 50-mile radius have completed their evacuations as federal authorities have expanded the quarantine zone and declared the area a complete no-fly zone except for military aircraft. The situation has deteriorated beyond all previous estimates, with reports now confirming that the infected are exhibiting unprecedented levels of intelligence and coordination. No civilian personnel are being allowed to enter or leave the quarantine zone, and families of those still trapped inside have been relocated to emergency shelters in distant cities. We go now to Melanie Daniels, who is still trapped inside Badger Creek and has been providing us with firsthand reports of conditions on the ground.
Leon, I'm speaking to you from the basement of Mercy General Hospital, and I have to tell you that the situation here has become absolutely hopeless. I was bitten yesterday morning while trying to reach a group of survivors holed up in the pediatric ward. One of those things grabbed me from behind a collapsed section of ceiling, and its teeth went right through my jacket and into my forearm. I can already feel it starting, Leon, a burning sensation spreading up my arm, and I'm getting so cold despite the fever. The other survivors here, the handful that are left, they've agreed to tie me up when I start to turn so I don't hurt anyone else. But before that happens, I need to report what I've seen, what everyone needs to know about how this nightmare really began. I found Dr. Sarah Chen, one of the lead researchers from Aperture Pharmaceuticals, hiding in the hospital morgue. She was dying from her injuries, but she lived long enough to tell me the truth. The Z virus wasn't an accident, Leon. It was a field test, a deliberate release to see how the pathogen would spread in a contained population. Badger Creek was chosen specifically because of our isolation, our distance from major cities, and our economic dependence on Aperture. Dr. Chen said they expected maybe a dozen casualties before they could contain it and gather their data. They never anticipated it would evolve this quickly, never thought it would adapt and spread the way it has. Leon, they murdered our entire city for a research project, and now I can feel my heartbeat slowing down. Tell the world what really happened here. Don't let them cover this up.
Melanie, stay with us. Please stay with us. Ladies and gentlemen, we've just lost contact with our field reporter, Melanie Daniels. And based on her final transmission, we are dealing with something far more sinister than anyone previously understood. If her report is accurate, then the Badger Creek incident was not an accidental release, but a deliberate act of bioterrorism conducted by Aperture Pharmaceuticals using innocent civilians as test subjects. Federal authorities have still not responded to our requests for comment, but multiple military convoys have been observed moving toward the quarantine zone. We are receiving reports from amateur radio operators inside the zone that the infected population may now number in the tens of thousands, with the creatures spreading beyond the original city limits, despite military containment efforts. We now go to Dr. Nathan Roper for what may be his final analysis of this unprecedented crisis.
Leon, based on all available data and the testimony from Dr. Chen that your reporter managed to obtain, we are looking at the complete failure of a biological weapon that was never meant to be contained in the first place. The Z virus has exceeded all parameters of its original design, showing rapid mutation rates that have made the infected far more resilient and aggressive than the original test subjects. The reanimated subjects retain only the most basic motor functions and an overwhelming compulsion to hunt living flesh, but they feel no pain, no fatigue, and will continue attacking even after sustaining injuries that would stop any living person. What we're seeing is the creation of a perfect biological weapon, one that spreads exponentially through bite transmission, while maintaining the single-minded focus of hunting and converting every living thing they encounter. The infected mass inside Badger Creek now represents an existential threat not just to the surrounding region, but potentially to the entire continent if it breaches containment, because these creatures will never stop, never tire, and never give up their pursuit of human prey. And I believe federal authorities are preparing to implement what they call sterilization protocols, and God help me, that may be the only option left to prevent this contagion from spreading beyond the current perimeter. If the reports about deliberate release are true, then Aperture Pharmaceuticals has essentially declared biological warfare on the American people, and the government's response will necessarily be swift and absolute. For any survivors still inside the quarantine zone, I am truly sorry, but there may be no way to extract you safely without risking global catastrophe. May God forgive us all for what we've allowed to happen and what we're about to do.
Dr. Roper, thank you for that sobering analysis. We are standing by for what sources indicate will be a major announcement from federal authorities within the next few hours regarding the government's final response to the Badger Creek crisis. For those of you who have family and friends still inside the quarantine zone, our hearts and prayers are with you during this unimaginable time. We will continue broadcasting as long as we are able, but please understand that we may lose communication capabilities as events unfold. This is Leon Redfield reporting what may be the final chapter of a tragedy that should never have been allowed to happen. Stay strong, stay together, and remember those we've lost. We'll be back with any updates as they develop.
All right, so this is probably going to be my last podcast for a while, maybe forever, I don't know. I'm Roger Thornhill, and normally I'd be welcoming a guest right about now, but there's no guest today because I'm trapped inside what they're calling the Badger Creek quarantine zone, and let me tell you, it is absolutely insane out here. I came here 3 days ago to try to get some first-hand reporting on what's really happening, thought I could sneak past the military checkpoints and get some exclusive content, you know? Turns out that was the dumbest decision I've ever made in my life, and I've made some really stupid decisions. So I'm broadcasting from the basement of what used to be Miller's hardware store on Main Street, running off a car battery and hoping the signal gets out before these things find me. And when I say these things, I mean the infected, the undead, the zombies, whatever you want to call them, because that's exactly what they are. I know how crazy that sounds. I know people are going to say I've lost my mind, but I'm looking at them right now through the boarded up windows, and they are definitely dead people walking around. There's this woman, or what used to be a woman, standing right across the street, and half her face is missing. Like something took a bite out of her skull, but she's just standing there swaying back and forth like she's listening for something. Her arm is bent at an angle that would break a normal person's bones, but she doesn't seem to notice or care. And here's the thing that's really going to blow your mind. I think this whole thing was planned. Not the outbreak itself getting out of control, but the initial release was definitely intentional. I managed to get into the Aperture Pharmaceuticals building before it got completely overrun, and there were documents scattered everywhere, emails and research notes that somebody was trying to destroy before they evacuated. Most of it was too technical for me to understand, but there was this one email chain between someone called Dr. Morrison and what looked like military contractors talking about field testing parameters and acceptable casualty projections for Phase 1 trials. Phase 1 trials, guys. They were testing this thing on us, using an entire city as their laboratory. There was another document that mentioned something about studying adaptive pathogen evolution in real-world scenarios and how important it was to maintain containment while allowing sufficient spread for data collection. They wanted this to happen, they just didn't expect it to get so far out of hand so quickly. The helicopters have been circling all day. Military ones, not rescue choppers, and I've been hearing jets flying overhead every few hours. Nobody's coming to help us. Nobody's trying to evacuate survivors. They're just watching, monitoring, probably taking notes on how their biological weapon performs under field conditions. I keep thinking about all those action movies where the government drops a nuke on the infected city to contain the outbreak, and I'm starting to wonder if that's what's coming next. The radio chatter I've been picking up on my scanner, it's all coded military communications, but I keep hearing references to sterilization protocols and total containment measures. That doesn't sound like rescue operations to me. That sounds like they're planning to wipe this place off the map. So if you're listening to this, if somehow this signal made it past their jamming equipment, just remember that whatever the official story ends up being, whatever they tell you on the news about accidental releases and heroic containment efforts, it's all lies. They did this to us on purpose, and now they're going to cover it up by making sure there are no witnesses left to tell the truth. I'm Roger Thornhill, and if this is my last broadcast, at least somebody out there knows what really happened in Badger Creek.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
My fellow Americans, I come before you tonight with one of the most difficult decisions any president has ever had to make in the history of our great nation. Let me be clear from the outset. What I'm about to share with you is not easy to hear, and the actions we must take are not ones that any of us wanted to contemplate. But sometimes, when you're the President of the United States, you have to make choices that weigh the lives of thousands against the lives of millions. And that's exactly the situation we're facing tonight with what we're calling the Badger Creek incident. Now, I want to start by saying that my heart goes out to every family who has lost someone in this tragedy. And I want you to know that we have exhausted every possible option, consulted with the finest minds in our military and scientific communities, and explored every avenue for rescue and containment before arriving at this decision. The truth is, folks, what happened in Badger Creek represents a threat to our national security unlike anything we have faced since World War II. And I'm not talking about foreign terrorists or enemy nations. I'm talking about a biological weapon that was developed right here on American soil by American citizens who betrayed every principle our country stands for. Let me tell you what we know, because I believe the American people deserve the truth, even when that truth is hard to accept. 3 weeks ago, a private research company called Aperture Pharmaceuticals deliberately released what they called the Z virus into the population of Badger Creek as part of what they termed a field test of their biological weapon. Now, when I say deliberately, I mean they made a conscious decision to infect innocent American citizens with a pathogen designed to kill them and then reanimate their bodies as weapons of war. They chose that community because it was isolated, because it was economically dependent on their facility, and because they believed they could contain the spread and gather their data before anyone outside that area knew what was happening. They were wrong, and their miscalculation has resulted in the deaths of over 30,000 Americans, and the creation of what our military advisors are calling the most dangerous biological threat our species has ever encountered. The infected population has grown beyond all projections. Our best scientists tell me that if even a single infected individual escapes the current quarantine zone, we could be looking at a continental pandemic within 60 days and a global extinction event within 6 months. I have authorized the immediate deployment of tactical nuclear weapons to completely sterilize the Badger Creek quarantine zone and everything within a 20-mile radius of the original outbreak site. I want to be absolutely clear about what this means. We are going to use the full force of America's nuclear arsenal to eliminate every trace of this biological weapon. And yes, that means we are going to sacrifice the lives of any survivors who may still be trapped within that area. I know how that sounds. I know there are people listening tonight who have family members unaccounted for in that region, and I want you to know that this decision is tearing me apart inside. But I have sworn an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States and the American people, and sometimes that oath requires making choices that no human being should ever have to make. If we don't act now, if we hesitate because we're hoping to save a few hundred people who may or may not still be alive in that zone, we will condemn millions of Americans and potentially billions of people worldwide to the same fate that befell Badger Creek. I cannot and will not allow that to happen, not on my watch, not while I have the power to prevent it. The nuclear strike will commence at 0600 hours Eastern Standard Time tomorrow morning, and I have ordered a complete media blackout of the operation for reasons of national security. We will continue to maintain the outer quarantine perimeter for an additional 30 days to monitor for any signs of contamination beyond the blast radius, and we will not lift travel restrictions in the affected region until we are absolutely certain that every trace of this pathogen has been eliminated. I will now be taking a few questions.
Mr. President, how can you justify using nuclear weapons on American soil against American citizens? Don't you think there might be other options that haven't been fully explored?
Well now, let me tell you something about the options we've explored, because I think it's important for people to understand just how exhaustive our analysis has been. We've consulted with every expert in biological warfare, every specialist in infectious disease control, every military strategist who has experience with containment operations, and the unanimous recommendation from all of these professionals is that conventional weapons and containment measures are insufficient to deal with this particular threat. The simple truth is that this pathogen was designed by some very smart but very evil people to be virtually indestructible through conventional means, and the only way to guarantee complete elimination is through the kind of intense heat and radiation that only a nuclear weapon can provide. Now, do I wish there was another way? Of course I do. But wishing doesn't change the reality of what we're dealing with. And the reality is that sometimes a president has to choose between terrible options and even more terrible consequences.
Mr. President, critics are saying that this whole situation could have been prevented if there was better oversight of private research facilities. How do you respond to allegations that your administration failed to properly regulate companies like Aperture Pharmaceuticals?
That's a fair question. And I'm not going to stand here and pretend that our regulatory system worked the way it was supposed to work in this case. The truth is, Aperture Pharmaceuticals was operating under multiple layers of security clearances and classified contracts that made normal oversight extremely difficult, and they deliberately concealed the true nature of their research from federal inspectors through a combination of falsified reports and what we now know were bribes to local officials. But let me be clear about something. The responsibility for this tragedy lies squarely on the shoulders of the people who made the decision to release that biological weapon, not on the regulatory agencies who were systematically deceived about what was actually happening in that facility. That being said, you can bet that when this crisis is over, we're going to be taking a very hard look at how we monitor and control biological research in this country, and we're going to make sure that nothing like this can ever happen again. But right now, my focus has to be on dealing with the immediate threat, not on pointing fingers or assigning blame for past failures.
Mr. President, what assurances can you give the American people that this pathogen hasn't already spread beyond the quarantine zone? Are there other outbreaks we don't know about?
Well, that's obviously the question that keeps me up at night, and I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you because I think the American people deserve honesty from their president. We have identified at least 3 other locations where Aperture Pharmaceuticals had research facilities, and we are conducting intensive monitoring and testing in all of those areas as we speak. So far, and I want to emphasize so far, we have not detected any signs of infection outside the Badger Creek region, but we are maintaining high alert status, and we have rapid response teams positioned at strategic locations across the country in case that situation changes. I've also been in contact with the leaders of Canada and Mexico to coordinate monitoring along our borders, and we have international health organizations tracking global transportation patterns to watch for any signs of spread beyond North America. The good news, if you can call any of this good news, is that this particular pathogen seems to require direct contact for transmission, so it's not airborne in the way that something like influenza spreads. But I want to be absolutely clear that we are not taking any chances, and if we detect even the slightest indication of infection outside the current quarantine zone, we will respond with the same decisive action we're taking in Badger Creek. That is all the questions I have time for today.
This is Leon Redfield with what I know will be our final broadcast regarding the Badger Creek incident. At 0600 hours this morning, approximately 15 minutes from now, the United States military will deploy tactical nuclear weapons to completely sterilize the quarantine zone and eliminate all traces of the biological weapon that has claimed so many lives. We have relocated our broadcast center to a distance of over 100 miles from the target zone. But even at this range, we expect significant electromagnetic interference that will likely end our transmission capabilities for the immediate future. I want to take a moment to honor the memory of our field reporter, Melanie Daniels, who gave her life to bring you the truth about what happened in that city, and whose final reports exposed the deliberate nature of this tragedy. She died a hero, and her sacrifice ensured that the world would know this was not an accident, but an act of bioterrorism perpetrated by American citizens against their own neighbors. We have received no further communications from inside the quarantine zone since yesterday evening, and we must assume that there are no longer any survivors capable of reaching our broadcast equipment. The decision to use nuclear weapons on American soil represents one of the darkest moments in our nation's history. But given the alternative of global extinction, it may also represent one of our finest examples of presidential leadership under impossible circumstances. History will judge whether President Kennedy made the right choice, but from our perspective, having witnessed the evolution and spread of this biological weapon, we believe there was no other option that could guarantee the safety of the human species. Ladies and gentlemen, we are seeing multiple bright flashes on the horizon in the direction of the former Badger Creek quarantine zone, and our radiation detection equipment is showing massive spikes consistent with nuclear detonation. The sterilization protocol has been implemented, and we can only pray that it has been successful in eliminating every trace of the biological weapon that threatened not just our nation, but our entire world. We are losing power to our transmitters due to electromagnetic interference from the nuclear blast, and this may be our final broadcast for some time. We will continue to monitor the situation as communications are restored, but for now, we can only wait and hope that the sacrifice of those 30,000 Americans was not in vain. This is Leon Redfield, and may God help us all for what we've done today and what we've allowed to be done in our name. We will return to regular broadcasting when conditions permit.
The nuclear sterilization of Badger Creek has been completed, and initial radiation surveys indicate complete elimination of all biological matter within the target zone. For the families of those we lost, I want you to know that their sacrifice prevented a global catastrophe that would have ended human civilization as we know it. The Z virus represented an evolutionary dead end for our species, a pathogen designed to turn us into weapons against ourselves, and only the most extreme measures could guarantee its complete destruction. However, I must report that Aperture Pharmaceuticals operated research facilities in at least 6 other locations across North America, and we have no way of knowing what other biological weapons they may have developed or where they might be stored. The company's executives disappeared in the days before the nuclear strike, and despite extensive manhunts, they have not been located. We must remain vigilant. We must reform our oversight of biological research, and we must never forget the lessons learned from the Badger Creek incident. The dead of that city will not rest easy until we ensure that nothing like this can ever happen again.
Ladies and gentlemen, my fellow Americans, tonight I want to speak to you about the difficult action our nation was forced to take in Badger Creek. The decision to authorize a nuclear strike on American soil is one of the heaviest burdens any president can carry. It was not taken lightly, and it was not done without sleepless nights and countless hours of consultation with our best scientists, military leaders, and public safety officials. I grieve with every family who has lost a loved one in this tragedy. I grieve with every American who looks at the heartland and wonders how such a thing could happen here in our own backyard. But let me be clear, the threat that had taken root in Badger Creek was unlike anything we have ever faced. It was spreading, and if left unchecked, it would have engulfed city after city, family after family. Containment was no longer possible by ordinary means. And so, with sorrow in my heart but with resolve in my duty, I gave the order. It was the only way to protect the greater good, to safeguard millions more lives. In the days ahead, we will mourn together, we will support the survivors, and we will learn everything we can from this terrible chapter. I promise you, as your president, we will rebuild, we will recover, and we will do everything in our power to ensure that such a catastrophe never happens again. Thank thank you, and may God bless the people of Badger Creek, and may God bless the United States of America.
"18 months have passed since the nuclear sterilization of Badger Creek, and I find myself compelled to make this final recording, not for any scientific journal or government committee, but for the historical record, and perhaps as a warning to future generations who may encounter what we now know was merely the first act of a much larger horror story. My name is Dr. Nathan Roper, and I was one of the primary scientific advisors during what the government officially terms the Badger Creek biological incident, though we who lived through it know it by its true name, the first successful field test of humanity's most perfect weapon against itself. The Z virus, as Aperture Pharmaceuticals called their creation, was not simply a biological weapon designed to kill efficiently, but rather something far more insidious, a pathogen engineered to transform human intelligence and social cooperation into tools of perpetual warfare. The most disturbing aspect of our post-incident analysis was not what we discovered about the virus itself, but what we learned about the scope and ambition of Aperture Pharmaceuticals' research program. Through financial records and corporate communications recovered by federal investigators, we determined that Badger Creek was not an isolated experiment, but rather one of at least 12 planned field tests scheduled to occur across North America over a 2-year period. Each test site was carefully selected for its geographic isolation, economic dependence on Aperture facilities, and what the company's internal documents coldly referred to as acceptable population parameters for data collection. The executives who designed this program had essentially created a business model based on the systematic murder of American citizens for the purpose of refining their biological weapons, with each outbreak providing valuable data on viral transmission rates, mutation patterns, and the effectiveness of various containment strategies. What makes this revelation particularly chilling is that in the months since the nuclear strike, evidence has surfaced proving the US government itself was backing Aperture's research. The strike on Badger Creek, once thought to be a desperate act of containment, now appears to have been a calculated effort to bury the evidence, an attempt to erase their own complicity in unleashing the Z virus. Even more disturbing, President Kennedy, who authorized the operation, has since disappeared without explanation, leaving behind a trail of speculation and silence. And Aperture was not acting alone. Financial backing for their research came from a consortium of international defense contractors and private military companies who saw the Z virus as the ultimate force multiplier for modern warfare. Imagine, if you will, the strategic advantage of being able to deploy a weapon that not only eliminates enemy populations, but converts them into additional soldiers for your cause, soldiers who require no food, no rest, no morale support, and who can operate in any environment where human life is sustainable. The implications for global conflict are staggering, and despite our success in containing the Badger Creek outbreak, we have every reason to believe that samples of the virus still exist in laboratories around the world. Perhaps most troubling of all is what has transpired in the 18 months since President Kennedy's devastating decision to authorize nuclear weapons against American soil. The executives responsible for the Badger Creek massacre, Dr. Rebecca Morris and CEO James Harper, and at least 6 members of their senior research staff vanished completely in the days before the nuclear strike and have not been apprehended despite an international manhunt involving every major intelligence agency. More ominously, we have documented at least 4 additional outbreaks in remote locations around the globe, each exhibiting the same characteristics as the original Badger Creek incident, each occurring in proximity to facilities owned by subsidiaries of the same international consortium that funded Aperture's research. A mining town in northern Canada was evacuated and sterilized by the Canadian military after reports of aggressive wildlife behavior and unexplained worker fatalities. An isolated research station in Siberia went silent for 3 weeks before Russian forces conducted what they claimed was a routine training exercise involving tactical nuclear weapons. A pharmaceutical facility in rural Australia suffered what authorities described as a catastrophic industrial accident that required the permanent evacuation of a 50-kilometer radius. Each of these incidents followed the same pattern: initial reports of unusual animal or human behavior, rapid escalation to widespread violence, complete communication blackout, and finally military intervention with weapons capable of total biological sterilization. The pattern is unmistakable, and yet the international community continues to treat these as isolated incidents rather than coordinated attacks against civilian populations. I fear that what we witnessed in Badger Creek was not the tragic conclusion of a rogue company's experiments, but rather the opening move in a new form of warfare that could reshape human civilization itself. The Z virus represents the perfect weapon for those who seek to control rather than merely defeat their enemies, and until we acknowledge the full scope of this threat and take coordinated global action to eliminate every trace of this research, I believe we will continue to see these isolated incidents emerge wherever corporate interests intersect with military ambition and human expendability. God help us all, for we have opened a door that may prove impossible to close, and the dead of Badger Creek are merely the first casualties in a war that most of the world doesn't even know has begun.